Today's multilateralism in 1984 revisited. Now that the Trump administration is off and running toward the milestone of their first 100 days, as we watch the clouds of intentional turmoil dissipate, the new president's approach to foreign policy is growing increasingly apparent, if not entirely self-evident. Just today, he has sent a letter to the Chinese Premier Xi Jinping, a brief message in which he alluded to the Chinese New Year 20 days late, thus creating a no doubt wholly unintentional insult and minor diplomatic slip in comparison to his extraordinarily misguided disregard of the One China policy a couple of weeks earlier, during which he had a phone chat with the president of Taiwan and gave her a personal invitation to the inaugural festivities. Far more troubling than a potential trade war with China over Trump's failure to clearly acknowledge the government of Mr. Xi Jinping as the only legitimate government of the Chinese people, whether in the mainland or Hong Kong or even Taiwan. Far more troubling is Trump's open admiration for Vladimir Putin. The United States had an uneasy alliance with the Soviet Union during World War II, immortalized by that iconic Yalta Conference photograph of Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin seated side by side, outdoors and all wearing their winter greatcoats. After the war, however, that alliance quickly decayed into one of mutual open hostility, and the Cold War got underway and has never let up, even after Glasnost, perestroika, and Gorbachev's political self-immolation. The years immediately following the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the devaluation of the ruble was a time of extreme hardship for the Russian people. A good number of Russians emigrated once they managed to secure enough cash for bribes and plane fare and went to various countries: Germany, Israel, Australia, the United States. There are well over 10,000 Russians in the city where I also happen to make my home, Spokane, Washington. Were the United States to overlook Russia's blanket bombing of Aleppo and the countless numbers of civilians instantly slaughtered or seriously maimed, were we to shrug our shoulders at Russia's repeated incursions into Ukraine, were we to ignore their treatment of the Muslim peoples in Chechnya, we would still have the problem of a de facto alignment with Russia and its allies, Syria, Iran, and at various times even China. The question comes down to the following: are friendly diplomatic relations with another country inherently also good relations, that is to say, safe and profitable relations? I think most people would say yes. But the United States ambassadors and secretaries of state have already weighed in on this matter by asserting in quite clear language one would not want Putin as a dancing partner or worse still, a strange bedfellow. The Russians, and Putin in particular, are far more Machiavellian in their approach to foreign affairs than the United States, and that is not a compliment. Admittedly, during the George W. Bush presidency, the United States fell into some very foul and reprehensible practices, such as those at the infamous Abu Ghraib prison, and any of the CIA dark sites where Arab prisoners were tortured with the sadistic techniques of waterboarding, among other things. When Bill O'Reilly quizzed President Trump on his open, even complimentary regard for the Russian premier, the talk show host reminded Mr. Trump that Vladimir Putin is a killer. And his eminent guest replied, "Do you think America is so innocent?" And he then briefly continued in this vein, sounding very un-Republican and much more like someone from the left to far left, such as Noam Chomsky, who has frequently reminded his audiences of numerous occasions when agents from the United States sought to either throw an election in some South American country or assassinate one of its leaders, Fidel Castro in particular. Trump Trump was quite correct here, although the context in which he made these remarks shocked and unnerved many conservatives who deeply resent the notion of the United States and the principal member of the former Soviet Union, both on an equally immoral footing. The compelling motivations of self-interest and nationwide security have driven previous presidential administrations to extreme lengths. The litany of transgressions on the part of the United States government can be seen to begin with the Native American populations and the hundreds of thousands of people from Africa who were brought here against their will. This was later followed by the willful and cynical exploitation of Chinese labor in the Pacific coastal states and some of those further inland. And of course, during World War II, all American citizens who came from Japan or whose forebears came from Japan were forcibly detained in a number of large prison camps which were built in short order, always in some remote desert location, such as Manzanar or Minidoka in southeastern Idaho. But following World War II, with the advent of the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union sought to paint themselves in the best possible light while reviling their international opponent for hypocrisy, interference in foreign governments, and crimes against humanity on the home front. In those days, the People's Republic of China was seen by most Americans as having gone red, and thus becoming the greatest of allies for the Soviet Union. Both ruled by totalitarian regimes, these two vast regions now instilled an uncommon fear in the hearts of most American politicians. Congressman McCarthy and his infamous kangaroo court, known as the House Committee on Un-American Activities, drew up lengthy blacklists of ostensible communist sympathizers and interrogated everyone invited to sit as a defendant before the committee. Are you now, or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? In this fashion, many careers and lives were callously destroyed. Abroad, once again, this time in Vietnam, the United States deployed the full might of all branches of the military to crush communist North Vietnam. And here, America's moral compass was thrown out the window. Civilians were murdered, entire villages firestormed, the once fertile land of the countryside laid to waste with what euphemistically was called a defoliant, Agent Orange, a highly toxic chemical brew which was later proven to have caused numerous cases of cancer and neurological diseases. On a less cataclysmic note, General Westmoreland falsified the body count reports he sent to President Johnson, minimizing American deaths and inflating the number of enemy corpses. One cannot lose sight of the past. Only through history can we ever hope to see the present world situation in its clearest and most revealing light. Yet today, the charge of seeing through an ideological lens often echoes through the halls of Congress. Charges of fake news and blindness to alternative facts issue often and stridently from the Oval Office. George Orwell's terrifying vision, which he vividly portrayed in 1984, has, by nearly everyone's account who has read the novel, come into actual being. China, Russia, and the United States are now essentially on the same footing. One can quibble about the quantities and types of weapons and manpower each of these countries possess, but the important thing to remember is the geopolitical dynamic itself, which will continue to dominate the world order for years to come. Yet all three of these great powers face a common enemy whose efforts to wreak havoc and destruction through military campaigns or suicide bombings will never cease. They, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, have found as much. This common enemy, strongly motivated by a sense of oppression and their own religious zeal, should to some extent have a unifying effect upon these three principal rivals. As always, only time will show whether this happens to be true or not.